through the ERGP a couple of times, but I'm sure this is one document we can't exhaust in a single conversation. So, a few questions for the Honorable Minister of Finance, so I'm sure you're listening on the sidelines there. Based on everything she says, what's your take?
Well, I think she alluded to the fact that Nigeria experienced a perfect storm, which apparently started in 2014, unlike what your last commentator said, and the fact that it was just a bumble to get around it and then get to us to this state. However, there are some few gaps within the statements that needs to be clarified. One is the fact that the government today has taken some steps to deal with some of the financial challenges in terms of the fiscal issues, creating some fiscal balance in there. But then it still has a huge amount of issues to deal with. But for me, there's one thing that stood out for me. You can achieve progress by coincidence, or you can actually do so by plan. If we assume that this is the plan we want to work with, the first thing that comes out to you is that there is nothing fundamentally different from this plan from the needs, the leads by the state, the Vision 2010, the Vision 2020, 2020. They've always spoken about growth, investing in people, and most importantly, building a competitive economy. But it seems, therefore, that in terms of plan, the 2017 to 2020 ERGP plan would therefore represent the overarching plan, which subsumes the MTF and the FSP.
What exactly was the MTF supposed to achieve or to deliver?
Well, the MTF followed the natural progress of where we create an expenditure framework. The significant thing they did in this administration was to look at the imbalance between the infrastructure gap and also try to make sure that the budget took care of the dichotomy between the recurrent and the capital expenditure. Most importantly, however, is that they had two issues to deal with. Either they were going to do a front-loaded adjustment or a back-ended adjustment. With a front-loaded adjustment, you had to go into some kind of austerity-type measures. And given the lessons we learned from advanced economies in Europe and what have you, and Nigeria's peculiar experience, and the incidents around the issue about exchange rate and interest rate, it became a lot more difficult thing to do. In fact, it was also not politically expedient for the government to do. So for any economist or any financial analyst, it was clear that we were not going to adjust that. So we were left with the back-ended adjustment approach. The back-ended adjustment approach would then say that having instituted some plans and some initiatives, which the MTF actually created what I call a contextual framework for, we would then be able to move as we get out of recession. But that leads to two major important questions. One, the ERGP as we have it did not address what I call the escape velocity plan. What is the escape velocity plan? The escape velocity plan talks about, you were not going to talk about growth out of recession alone, but growth on a sustainable basis thereafter. So that means that you would also have to consider the sterile effect of all your plans on the economy.
That means we need to do something with diversification. And we've talked about this, we've turned it around the table, we've played it all around for quite some time. Do you think the ERGP can deliver on that?
Well, you see, look, like all plans, the ERGP, like all economic plans, the ERGP is a very good work of fiction. What is a singular point around a good work of fiction is the effective tripod upon which it stands, right? The subplots, the stories. So you probably need three things. One, you need the policy, outright fiscal policy that can be aligned with your monetary policy. You need programs, and then you need projects. That means, as it is, the ERGP must have a rollout plan. That means we must be able to cost the ERGP. You obviously are aware of what is happening concerning Saudi Arabia. And then when they had their whole plan, they detailed and broke those whole thing down. I think that's not a challenge with the Ministry of Finance. It is something I'm aware that the Ministry of Budget and Planning is actually working on to say that we must be able to cost the ERGP for the next few sessions. So that it's not like a current administration plan, it's a Nigerian plan. And as such, we must be able to then say, here are the policies. And one of the challenges we've always had is that balance between the fiscal policy or the monetary policy. But so that we do not turn into semantics, what really are we talking about? The ERGP is more monetarist in outlook. It talks about GDP as a measure of growth. We are then moving into the era where we are talking about qualitative growth as against quantitative growth. Now, the GDP will provide you the quantitative growth. The qualitative growth will come from the GNI. Now,
Yes, yes. Again, that speaks to the budget on one side, whether it is in real value or just paper value.
No,
in terms of,
see, the Ergp talks about the ascension in money supply to about, say, maybe 45 trillion naira by 2020.
Yes.
But then it puts inflation at about a single digit.
No,
you can't grow money supply by about 100% and expect your inflation to stay at a single digit, and it doesn't talk about interest rate. So the harmonization of your fiscal expectations must be steeped in your money supply considerations.
Do you think if we have the details of the Ergp from the Planning and Budget Ministry, Udo Udoma, we should have a bit of more clarity on some of these, the devil is in the details?
No. They do have a solid, workable plan in place. It could have been any of the 2020 documents that we're working on. What we are asking is that we need to be able to break it down and cost it. And then what that means is that we'll then be able to agree on policy. When you talk about diversification, there's not so much of you say we want to diversify this area or that. The framework for doing that is in the fiscal policy. And what is that? Taxes and tariffs.
And that's where budget comes in?
Oh, no. Then you then look at all the aggregate of what you want to do, and then you determine at the level of which we change our taxes and tariffs, including trade agreements we make with external relations and whatever. And I think that's the real challenge. So rather than the budget and planning to sit down and say, look, we've done the Ergp, or we are just monitoring it, there's nothing you're monitoring. We then have to monitor and go back and break it down and have an actual rollout plan, which allows companies, for example, to be able to take 6 months, 1 year, 2-year projections in terms of how they want to skew or take risk. The most important thing is that this dichotomy of looking at government separate from business is actually wrong. Private sector is not an alternative to government. It's a complementary aspect of government. Like the Honorable Minister of Finance spoke about and said that job creation is a function of the private sector. All these policies coming, and that's why I go back to the taxes and tariffs issue. And if you get that right, basically you've brought in the private sector into it. And then issues around monetary policy can then come in terms of how to serve as a complement.
We will have 4-year budgets into the Ergp. Do you think this current one is a good way to
Which current
things up? The 2017, it's just been passed.
Well, if you look at the 2017, it's just an extension of the 2016. If you look at it, basically, it's more or less like a recalibration of adjustments in terms of real value. There's really no significant increase in terms of the value of the 2016 budget to 2017. It only adjusted for inflation, as it were. And that tells you something, that demand has fallen. We all know that. So purchasing parity has also adjusted. So what you have is that technically there's no difference between your 2017 and 2016 budget. So we'll see that through. But the real question you ask yourself is that if we take the Ergp as an overarching plan, whatever you therefore have in 2017, right, is basically a component of that Ergp. So to produce 2018 should not be a difficulty because there's a framework, as it were. There's a plan. But that goes back to my initial comments that we then need to break it down because businesses need to take a look at that Ergp rollout plan and make decisions. It is those decisions they will make vis-a-vis what will happen in terms of taxes, in terms of tariffs, which are basically more like incentives. Then they are able to then take risk. And that goes back to the other question. Traditionally, we've been able to have, your last speaker was talking about the fact that since April 24th, we've had an uptick in the equities market because the foreign markets are able to come. That's significant. But here is the question. Over the time, we've been able to have increases in that area because of 2 reasons. One, low yields in advanced economies and high oil prices. If we therefore, with not significant oil prices, but still we have no yield in the markets and we still have the investment, it's a good thing. But that's not really where it is because we still have a huge gap. If the Honorable Minister talks about infrastructure, power alone will require about $100 billion. Housing will require about far much more than that in terms of gaps. She talked about rail. Here's the challenge about rail. Rail will not happen in less than 18 months or 24 months. To the real effect, therefore, when we talk about that issue about sterile effect, the minimum requirement period between after a recession should be about 18 months for you to see the impact on unemployment, for you to see the impact on those ones. So this traditional monetary approach we've taken would have to be tempered with the reality to understand that we still cannot be celebrating hugely, but we must acknowledge that the administration has done significant taken significant steps to stop the bleeding. Now it's the time for rebuilding.
Do you think we've technically been able to stop the hemorrhage?
Yeah, we have done significant, because the structure of the Nigerian economy ties itself closely to, and again, the budget 2017 alludes to the assumptions. Exchange rate, it talks about which is a function of oil price and your production per se, and then basically it just focuses on the fact that the structure of the Nigerian economy is such that if the oil prices, which is the driver, continues to be retained as a driver, which is something the Ergp seeks to try to correct, but which it hasn't fully done. It tries to correct it to say, look, there is so much more to the Nigerian economy than oil. We recognize, however, that we will need oil money to move into that diversification phase.
President Buhari's administration, midterm reports, deadline May 29, 3 Mondays from now, we'll be having that conversation and having the parade and all of that. Give us your outlook, give us your reading of the midterm report.
So let's do the intellectual parade. The intellectual parade is that in the first 1 year we decommission the economy. The second year is we try to recalibrate the economy. So we did one thing, we stopped the bleeding. We've been able to generate new interest in the Nigerian economy, despite the few reservations by the IMF. But then also few, with the exception of interest rates, capital flows, and you do know that one of the significant challenges Nigeria had was about 3% of the GDP between 2011 and 2014 was moving out in terms of illicit capital outflows from the economy. That has been stopped. That is significant. And to that extent, we are saying that Nigeria needs a much more progressive plan, which is what I continue to talk about, the rollout, that then shows boldness in terms of those gaps we know we have. It is not perfect, but we're saying 2 years, rather than delve on the past and delve on what had happened even in previous administrations, to say we now have a basis and some level of relationship between the private sector and the government now to begin a bigger conversation to say, for us right now, the 2018 plan should have been something we are discussing about now, not the 2017 plan. They will sign it, it's just an extension of 2016, as it were. It's the 2018 plan to give confidence in the whole economy and to begin to talk about it. But don't forget one last thing, that whereas we are taking the top end in terms of it, we still have this crowding out effect in terms of money supply. And as such, the ordinary man, the common denominator in an economy, the household, is still in deep challenges in terms of the truth. But if you were to say, how has the government done as to the half year, they are in a position to not have any excuse anymore to build on the economy.